Okay, hi, welcome to this, which is the last of the videos by me, designed to give you a sense of what I say in my chapters, which run throughout the book. You'll also find videos by some of my co-authors describing the essays that they contribute in this kind of dialogic structure that we have, whereas where I've written a series of chapters which are in dialogue with essays contributed by my co-authors. Okay, so this video focuses on chapters 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, which are quite a tight sequence. Chapter 4 is called Close Reading the Multiplicitous Text Through Languages. And again, we have that S of languages in brackets for the reason I explained in an earlier video. Then the chapters that follow focus on particular words that are particularly important in Charlotte Brontë's text, and explores what becomes of them in many of the translations, and indeed what different words the translations bring in to do related kinds of work. So chapter 1 starts from the word passion. Chapter 5 starts from the word passion. Chapter 6 is on the word plane. Chapter 7 is on the pairing of walk and wander. And it also includes readings of 2 scenes of the novel and a theorization of what I call littoral reading. So that's not literal as in the sense literal meaning, but littoral with 2 T's, Littoral. So littoral in the sense of being on a shoreline. I'll say more about that in a minute. And then in chapter 8, I offer some conclusions. So these chapters form the spine of what is roughly the second half of the book, where we're moving into really ever closer readings of the language of the texts. And as always, these chapters are alternating with essays by my co-authors, which focus on particular languages and issues. Right, so let's go back to chapter 4. What I say there is that when you're looking at text in a world literary context, one of the most important and interesting things to pay attention to is language difference. So if you see Jane Eyre or any text as a prismatic world work that's constituted by the source text and all the translations together, then obviously you have to think about the fact that it is full of different languages, of different kinds of language. How do we understand the way the work morphs through language difference, and how can we describe the changes that happen? Well, one way, as we've seen already in earlier videos, is to focus in on particular languages and contexts, so you kind of narrow your perspective. Another, though, is to focus on, take a particular aspect of the text and keep a wider perspective, so track that particular aspect across many translations. And drawing on work by all the co-authors and also actually by other contributors to the project, this is what I do in the sequence of chapters 4, 5, 6, 7. So as a group, just talking about things, we tried out various aspects of the text to see what would work best for this kind of mode of reading. What could we choose? What features could we kind of pick on to follow? So, for instance, we looked at some aspects of Brontë's style, and we looked at patterns of metaphor. And these were, these explorations were quite interesting, and I say something about them in chapter 4. But what we found that really enabled us to look across many different translations in an illuminating way was to focus on particular key words. And in chapter 4, you can find, reference to and discussion of the other critics and theorists whose work underpins this approach. So, for instance, I discuss the concept of agnation, and I discuss the idea of untranslatability. And you can find brief explorations of some words that were important to Brontë, like the word glad, the word happy, and the word mind. So that sort of chapter 4 is basically an introductory chapter to this approach of focusing on keywords. Chapter 5 then focuses on one word that is especially powerful in the novel, and this is the word passion. The word passion keeps reappearing throughout the book, and the idea I'm pursuing about it is that as it reappears, it implicitly makes an argument. So passion can be love, it can be romantic passion, but it can also be, more kind of harsher passions like anger and self-assertion. And what I think Brontë is saying through her repeated uses of the word is that for a young woman in the mid-19th century, love need not be a kind of decorous and passive state. It can include self-assertion, self-fulfillment, resistance to injustice. So if you take a word like this and look at just one instance of it, together with a range of translations, what you see is, as it were, the semantic potential of the word being realized in different ways according to the translator's imaginations, their context, and the resources of the language that they are using. Let me give you an example. This is from near the beginning. Little Jane has got into a fight with her older cousin John, who's been bullying her, and gloriously she seems to be winning, but then some servants and family members come in, and she's pulled off John, and a voice says, "Did you ever see such a picture of passion?" Now, I think this question is also implicitly directed at readers. That's to say, it asks us, what picture are you seeing here? What kind of passion is this that this is a picture of? And of course, translators are readers, so they are faced with the same question, and they need to, find their own words for the picture that is being presented here. And what you find when you look at a range of translations is, of course, you find that different translators have said different things. For instance, for an anonymous Italian translator in 1904, Jane is rabbiosa, angry or enraged. We could back translate that as. Obviously the English back translations that I give don't exactly correspond to the words in the different languages, but they kind of give you an idea of the sort of shift that's being introduced. For the Portuguese translator, Leguarda Ferreira in 1951, she's a ferazinha, or a little beast. For the Italian translator, Ugo Dettore, in 1974, the picture is pietosa, strangely, or pitiful. For the Hebrew translator, Talaba, in 1986, it is meshulevet, or ecstatic. And I'm indebted to, for some of these examples, I'm indebted to different colleagues in the project. Now, if you go now to the book, Prismatic Jane Eyre, what you will find is many such translations laid out as an array on the page, maybe there's sort of 20 or 30 of them. And I've also presented them as an animation, because actually you look at the array and, it's kind of impressive, but it's quite hard to read. It's quite hard to sort of think about each new translation as itself, but also related to the others. And my idea was that if you watch them appearing one after another in an animation, which you can also kind of stop if you want and go back, that helps you sort of just inhabit, I guess, the complexity of this multilingual sort of slice of the multilingual work that the Jane Eyre as a prismatic world work. That's to say, as a kind of multilingual text that is always morphing across language difference. Okay, so that's just one appearance of the word. But in the chapter, I look at a sequence of such appearances. So each time the word passion appears in English, we look at a range of translations. And what that shows us is two things. So the first is how the signifying potential of each moment is realized differently in different translations. But the second thing is how these moments join up or do not join up according to the choices that the translators make. So in different languages, you'll have to go and look for the detail, but these moments that sometimes are joined up by the same word being used, sometimes some of them are joined up and others are split apart. So it's a kind of complicated picture of, as it were, a kind of landscape of signification being rearranged. These different patterns of definition make the novel signify differently, but it's in quite intricate ways, which I'm going to have to leave you to go to the chapter to explore further. Chapter 6 then looks at another important word, which is plain. And in Bronte's language, this word spans meanings of physical unattractiveness, but also of perceptiveness, as in seeing something plainly, and honesty and straightforwardness, as in kind of speaking plainly. And the argument she makes through her repetitions of the word is basically that if you are plain looking, it can make it easier for you to see things plainly and speak out plainly, because you're not being looked at the whole time. You're not an object of desire. You're not having to perform socially. It's easier for you to adopt the position of an observer, and from the position of an observer, you can see, obviously, but also you can speak out. As with the word passion, I again look at a sequence of instances. And again, we see the two things. So both how the richness of meaning of the word leads to different transformations in different translations, and then how each moment kind of joins up differently with other moments where the word plain is used in English to organise this signifying material in different ways. But I also take a sort of new step in this chapter, which is that I trace out some of the different patterns that are formed in the different translations. So as throughout the project, I'm not thinking of what's going on here as a kind of loss. It's not that Bronte's use of the word plain is especially complex, and therefore inevitably when the sequence of instances of the word plain is broken up, that's inevitably loss, because instead different sequences are created in the translations. In this chapter, I follow out a couple of these. So, for instance, in French, there is, unsurprisingly, no word that covers the same range of meaning as plain in Bronte's language. So the translators have to join things up differently. And one of them, Noémie Lesbazet-Souvestre, whose translation was published in 1854, she reaches for the word laide for many appearances of the word plain, especially those that are to do with physical appearance. So what she does is she tends to kind of split off moments where Brontë uses the word plain for appearance, for Jane's appearance, split that off from moments where Brontë uses the word plain to talk about perception and speech. But this creates a new network of meaning, because she also uses that word laide, that French word that's often translated into English as ugly, although of course it has its own complex range of meanings. Lesbazet uses that word laide for these instances of plain, but she also uses it for appearances of the word ugly. So instances that Brontë separates out, Lesbazet-Souvestre joins up with the same word. And this matters because in Bronte's text, plain is very strongly associated with Jane. And the word ugly, this is a gender difference, the word ugly is very strongly associated with Rochester. Mr. Rochester is ugly looking, as is well known, and he's also morally ugly in various ways too. And in fact, if I were asked to sum up Bronte's novel in just 3 words, those words would be plain meets ugly. But Lesbazet-Souvestre creates a new network of meaning, because she also uses that word laide where Brontë uses the word ugly. For Lesbazet-Souvestre, both Jane and Rochester are laide, so plain ugly as it were. So the picture she sees is not one in which different qualities, plainness on the one hand and ugliness on the other hand, meet, but rather what she sees is a kind of world of appearance and character qualities where different aspects of the same quality are manifesting themselves in the two characters, Jane and Rochester, and so they as it were, gravitate towards one another. And I then look at an Italian translation which does some interesting things with another equivalent, brutto, but I'll leave that for you to see in the chapter, if you like. Then we get to chapter 7, which is on the twin terms walk and wander, which, if you remember, appear right at the beginning of the book. There was no possibility of taking a walk that day. And then a little bit further on, we had wandered indeed an hour in the shrubbery. So it's quite a significant pairing that's set up right at the beginning of the book. The kind of directedness of walking and the kind of drift of wandering. And in chapter 7, again, I'm interested in how this signifying material is structured differently in different languages. And drawing on work by my co-authors, I look at new patterns that are formed in Persian and Chinese, as well as in Italian. And I also introduce some JavaScript animations that have been made by Paola Gaudio. And these are animations of two scenes in the novel that show multiple translations kind of appearing. And I also, at the end of this chapter, explain this idea of littoral reading, TTORAL, littoral reading. And this is the idea that you should read with an awareness that the words in front of you can always be different. They are always, as it were, liable to float off and become something different. And that you should read with this transformative potential in mind. So obviously it's not kind of practical to look at, 30 different translations of any given instance all the time, but nevertheless you can take the awareness that this exercise, as it were, gives you, and hold that in mind in your reading. And for me, that's a kind of really sort of kind of imaginatively energizing perspective to bring kind of mode of reading to adopt. We then get to the end of the book and chapter 8, which is very short. So there have also been 17 essays interspersed with my chapters up to this point. Chapter 8 presents some of what presents my conclusions. It begins, though, by saying, we invite each reader to draw their own conclusions from this volume, and hopefully to redraw them in the course of an ongoing conversation with it. And this, to me, is a really crucial emphasis. The book, Prismatic Jane Eyre, is vast. It presents an astonishing range of material explored from many different points of view. But all this is still only actually quite a small selection from the enormous phenomenon of language and history and, human engagement that is the prismatic world work Jane Eyre. And Jane Eyre is, of course, just one of many thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of texts that share in this mode of existence that are prismatic world works. So I think it's really important to realize that in reading, as a person reading, you're entering into only a small area of this much larger, multilingual, transnational phenomenon, which is the prismatic world work Jane Eyre. So any attempt to, as it were, sum up or kind of legislate about what's going on in it can only ever be a contentious simplification. That's to say something that to me is going to look more like a kind of imposition, more like an expression of kind of readerly desire or power, more like an imposition by the reader or the interpreter. It's going to be more that than it is, what I think we should be doing, which is a kind of attentive endeavour to describe and understand what's really going on. And if you're engaged in that endeavour, part of what you're going to realise is that the phenomenon is so big. So in the conclusions, I present my conclusions, but they're designed to be received dialogically by you, and therefore to be part of an ongoing conversation about an engagement with this material. The aim then is not to wrap the project up, but to keep it open. And that's why it's important to conclude inconclusively. Thank you. Hope you enjoy the book.